to Face to Face with me, Azad Ali. This week we're looking at Muslim communities and challenges and prospects. In particular, we're going to look at the challenges of Muslims actually leaving Islam, ex-Muslims. What is the phenomenon? What's driving this? And really, as a community, are we even aware of this? And what are we doing to deal with this? Joining me in the studio, I'm honoured to have Shaykh Shams Adduha, who's the founder and director of Ibrahim College and also Mawarid Assalamu alaikum. Shaykh Shams, so Muslim community challenges and prospects. One of the major challenges that a lot of people are seeing is Muslims leaving Islam. This phenomena of the ex-Muslims and everything else. I mean, some of it is perhaps politically driven, but the reality is there are Muslims leaving Islam. It's something that you've come across yourself. What's going on?
So, this is one of the things since leaving my previous role at Ibrahim College that I've decided that I'm going to work on actively. And it was triggered by a piece of a Pew survey in the States that found that, and this isn't politically driven, it's just a survey, and it found that 23% of Muslims born into Islam had left Islam in the States, in America. On the one hand, finally a number was associated to a phenomenon that we knew was happening. By that point, people had already started coming to me and my colleagues talking about their doubts. Right? We now knew that somewhere in the world, this is the number. Then we thought about the UK situation. We thought, okay, Christianity and religion is strong in America compared to the UK. But in the UK, Muslim community infrastructure is stronger. If the two balanced themselves out, right? What we really should be predicting is that the numbers are probably the same in the UK, right? There's reasons to believe that it could be better, less than 23%. There's reasons to also believe that it could be worse, right? So that's a crisis. That's almost a quarter.
It's a big number.
It's a big number. And since then, I've been reading up on research, etc. And it does turn out to be, Yaqeen Institute's done some research on it. There's a book called The Apostates, written by a man called Simon Cotty, who interviewed 40 people who'd left Islam. It's a common phenomenon. Some of us have personal experience of people coming to us with their doubts, and it ranges from, I've got doubts about Islam, I've got doubts about a particular aspect of Islam. I have same-sex attraction, and therefore I can't square that with Islam, etc., etc. All of these things are now common. So the question now is, well, what's going on? What are some of the underlying issues?
I mean, from what you said, I mean, obviously, lots of people. I mean, I myself have come across examples where people have concerns and doubts, and they're not really being addressed. Just before we go into the actual different types of reasons, maybe, do you think, as a community, this is something that anyone's paying any attention to?
Only reactively. Right. I don't think the community has woken up to the fact that this is something that requires organized effort. It requires serious thought. It requires a rethinking of how faith is taught, and how we tackle crisis of faith. And research has shown that crisis of faith is because of a number of factors, but we don't have an organized response for any of it. I mean,
so some of the common things, I mean, people would probably think is, yes, social change has been huge. That there are more kind of liberal attitude and all of that kind of stuff, which doesn't sit well with Islamic kind of ethos and moral values, as it were. So people who are living here, born here, brought up here, they're used to this lifestyle. All of a sudden, they find all of this a little bit difficult. When you say it's like reactionary, so you're saying people do respond to it, but you've said what
individually, it's a reaction. It's like my daughter's got doubts about Islam. What do I do? Now there's a bit of action. Now an imam tries to get engaged. My son,
but there's nothing continuous.
There's no effort. There is no kind of, this is one of the key issues that must be addressed in khutbahs. This is something that has to be part of the curriculum in madrasas. This is something that imams have to be trained to be able to handle. None of that is happening.
Right. So why do you think you know, is it because maybe, I mean, that Pew report, just, you know, I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but maybe it's just, because surveys, to be honest, you know, how reliable can they be? I mean, it's a sample.
I believe the survey. I'll say, I'm going to be straight up about this. I believe the survey, it actually is reflective of some of my experiences with people who have doubts in faith and have crises of faith. But I think that the Muslim community feels a false sense of security because of Islam is the fastest growing religion narrative, because of a lot of positive kind of media work around da'wah efforts, etc., etc. So what's happening is there is a lot of focus on growth, which creates this false sense of security, but there's a lot of conquest, but absolutely no kind of protection of territory. Right? And I think that's what's going on.
Okay.
And as a result,
false sense of security.
Yeah, false sense of security, because everybody's thinking, oh, it's the fastest growing religion in the world. You know, people are converting.
No, true. Yeah, because you readily hear and see, you know,
that is the narrative.
This person's taking shahada, that person.
Exactly.
Every day you receive 10 to
and
15.
That should happen.
Yeah.
Those positive messages are important.
Yeah.
But
okay, so just, I mean, from your experience, I mean, what are some of the key things people are citing, you know?
So earlier you hit the nail on the head when you said that, you know, some of the kind of living in a liberal society, the impact of modernity, etc., because these things are so pervasive and all around us. It's all over television, it's all over media, it's all over the internet, etc., etc. It's in schools. Some of the key ideas like scientism, liberalism, modernism, secularism, etc. These things are impacting young people in a way, particularly in later generations. Like our generation, not so much. We didn't quite feel the impact of that stuff as much. But generations younger than us, who are from kind of immigrant parents, they've been impacted so profoundly that when they encounter a particular teaching of Islam or a particular belief of Islam, they don't think to themselves, epistemologically, they don't ask, is this true? Does the Quran actually say this? Does the Prophet actually say this? And then in their minds think, well, if the Prophet has actually said this, I accept it. That's not how they're thinking. That's how I would think. That's how you would think. That's not how they're thinking. They're thinking, how do I feel about this? Right? There's a kind of individualistic, personal response. How do I feel about this? And the moment you say I, the next question is, well, how are your thoughts shaped? What shapes your ideology? On what basis do you now critique a particular aspect of Islam? And that usually is basically, you know, liberalism, etc. So what's happening is the average young person is basically looking at Islam and thinking, what does liberalism has to say about this aspect of Islam, and not the other way around?
No, I think one of the things I've noticed myself, even in universities and others, is there was a time when Islamic societies were very Islamic, if you like. So their major activities were like halakas, study circles, seerah, Quran, tajweed. You know, it was all religion, prayer, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, you know, there's a lot more politics. There's more political issues, whether it's to do with Palestine or, you know, Kashmir or, you know, all of the different things that are happening. So we have a lot of Muslims that are politically active, but maybe not as as aware of their religious obligations and the closeness
They're
to
not
their religion.
spiritually active.
Yeah, maybe, but that's a better way of putting it. Is this something?
There is definitely a crisis of spirituality for all of us. I'm not sitting on a pedestal saying it. There's definitely a crisis of spirituality, and that usually comes from a kind of a latent crisis of faith, because usually you spiritually commit to something that you absolutely have conviction in.
I mean, one of the things sometimes people will say is, look, to be a good person, you don't have to be a Muslim. You know, to be a kind person, you don't have to be Muslim. You know, to value people's human rights, you don't have to be Muslim.
Yeah, but people don't make those comments out of a vacuum. Those comments are influenced by other ideas. These things are shaped by other ideas. It's the reason why 30, 40 years ago our parents didn't say things like that, right? So the question now is, what are those ideas, and what does Islam have to say?
What do you
about
think?
those ideas?
What do you think some of those ideas
Well,
are?
these are all kind of enlightenment ideas. It all comes from the struggle of enlightenment thought against religion in the West, which kind of produced liberalism,
Right.
which isn't always a bad thing, but we have to recognize how it kind of how it interacts with religion, particularly with Islam, with our faith.
Do you, I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, these are very long-term social changes that are conditioning people.
Well, let's put it simply. Let's look at what are the ideological conditions that have contributed to the rise of atheism, right?
Yeah.
We know that is fact. Statistically, it's a fact, right?
Okay.
Whatever that is, we need to understand it, and we need to be able to engage it and respond to it from an Islamic faith point of view.
Yeah.
In order to do that, we have to be able to engage at the level of ideas, meaning it's no longer enough to say, this is Islam, here are the 5 pillars, here are the 6 pillars of faith, these are your obligations, go ahead and do them. Now, you have to address all of those things in response to the alternative ideas that are everywhere in society. And these things are no longer ideas that are just being taught at university, or they're no longer ideas that you access in a philosophy book. These are now ideas that are infusing every aspect of society.
Yeah, they're just normal part of everyday life.
Part of everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily a particular philosophical class you're going to go to get there.
Yeah.
It's just happening in the canteen.
It's there. You watch it on TV, you hear it on radio, you read about it on the internet. It's there in the movies, it's in TV shows, etc. It's being promoted everywhere.
So, if I understand what you're saying, and we're coming up to break and probably pick it up then, we can't just say it's Quran and Sunnah. We have to actually go a little bit more than that and explain it in the context that we're in.
Yeah,
so before you answer,
we'll
take the break. Yeah, sorry to cut you off there. Do join us after the break. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Face to Face with me, Azad Ali. So sorry, just before the break, I did have to stop you. So how do you, I mean, you mentioned this is something that you've kind of focused on since moving to a different role from Ibrahim College. How do you teach Islam in the current context then? In the 21st century, what are the contexts that you need to?
So at the academic kind of cutting edge level, we have to intellectually engage through our theology with all of the ideas that encounter with Islam, right? And it's no longer a kind of zero-sum thing where it's like this idea clashes with Islam 100%, so you just throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is very much an encounter. We have to kind of understand it properly and be able to provide a response at the academic level.
Just on that, how do you, I mean, one of the things I've noticed in the academia and people intellectually discussing this issue is sometimes it's very hard to make a distinction between Islam and other ideas. So how do you keep the deen or Islam, how do you keep it unique so that it does shine above all the other ideas? Because that's not something I'm seeing.
It's spiritually unique.
Right.
Intellectually, if you think about it intellectually, if you study the deen intellectually as an intellectual tradition, there is a lot of nuance that is for the average person is almost unexpected.
Right.
I think where we are distinct is spiritually, in our spiritual path. We are distinct in terms of our values. We're distinct in terms of our worship. We're distinct to an extent also in certain cultural features, in certain cultural norms that are informed by Islam. I don't believe Islam has a culture, but there are norms there are norms that can be identified as Islamic that kind of run through all Islamic cultures.
So sorry, just to let you continue. So that was the academia.
The academic level, but I think there is some attention there. Some work has been done in that front, and there has been a kind of intellectual encounter with modernity and so on. Not enough, but it's there. But what hasn't happened is that the way ideas that shape modernity, ideas that shape liberalism, ideas that secular ideas, etc., and ideas the way these ideas have kind of trickled down in the West, down to the kind of societal level, the same thing hasn't happened. So the way all of these things shape how children are educated in primary school, in secondary school, and so on, the way they shape law, the way they shape kind of what is accepted and not accepted in society, etc., etc. To the extent that if a person who lived in Britain in the 19th century or even the 20th century was resurrected today, they'd think they'd been awakened in a different planet, on a different planet. It's a completely different world. It's basically science fiction. But also ideologically, they wouldn't be able to identify where they are. Right? So that much has changed. Because things have trickled down to that level, right? The same thing hasn't happened with regards to our philosophy, our theology, and so on. We haven't done that. So Muslims, for example, and in order to do that, the way we educate has to change, right? When I was studying theology, first of all, not a lot of theology is taught nowadays in seminaries, right? When it is taught, it's responsive to classical ideas. So we're taught this is what Islamic theology is. This is what the Muslims believe, or in our case, this is what Sunni Islam teaches. Right? And then they'll say, as opposed to the Mu'tazila, as opposed to the Khawarij, as opposed to the Rawafid, as opposed to etc. etc., who are now kind of 1200, 1300-year-old kind of groups that have absolutely zero relevance today. What we need is a theology where we're taught this is what Islam says, this is what Muslim believes, as opposed to kind of secular ideas, as opposed to certain liberal ideas, and we have to be nuanced about it as well.
What you've identified as is actually quite scary. So I suppose you can get away with it when you don't have so much, or you're living in a predominantly Muslim majority country where you don't have those ideas rampant in society. But here in the UK, if people aren't being taught this, then
by the way,
they're ill-equipped.
So it's a myth that these things are not rampant in Muslim societies. It's a universal problem. So these ideas are now rampant.
So the world is
Muslim
now an
societies.
oyster.
No, but actually, it's been going on in the Muslim world for a long time. It's been going on for almost a century. Think about
like things like communism and things like that.
Think about that. No, go as far back as the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Go as far back as that. We are talking about things that began kind of early in the 20th century.
True.
Why did the Muslim world politically collapse, etc.? We think economics. We think military power. We think colonialism. We think those kind of things. But behind all of that is ideas, right? And we've ignored that. We've ignored the influence of ideas.
So how? I mean, you've identified that the way we educate and teach children in the madaris and everything else need to change to include theology that is contextual and deals with these challenges. That's a very long-term thing. In the meantime,
short-term. Thank you. So short-term, there are some basic things that I think need to start happening right now. There are people who understand these issues in the Muslim community, right? I've now pretty much, my plan is to dedicate all of my time to this, right? And what needs to happen now is, I think madrasas have the greatest immediate influence, right? Then you've got the masajid, then you've got our preachers and the way they articulate Islam to the masses. All of these people need to retrain themselves theologically, right? Every single madrasa in the UK now needs to organize training for their teachers so that their teachers can address difficult questions that are...
Can you give us an example? Because I think you've had some experience.
So recently I was invited to a madrasa, right, to go and speak to the students because the students were asking questions about faith that the teachers couldn't handle, right? Now, it's unacceptable that our teachers who are responsible for teaching religion to these children can't handle these questions. But they can't handle them because they've not been trained to deal with them. Right? And we're talking about questions about evolution. We're talking about questions in the whole Islam and science, Islam and rationality, etc. These are things that we've addressed, our tradition has addressed, but we've just stopped teaching them. Right? There's been this lull in theological teaching for almost a century.
Wow. It's quite disheartening. I mean, you mentioned masajid and people who are preaching or presenting talks or running institutions. Do you think masajids would want to pick this subject up? You know, because it's something that you're right. I've never heard a khutbah on, you know, people leaving religion and what we need to do and, you know, how we need to approach this. You know, I can't recall a single khutbah like this.
Well, some of it we don't have to target it in that way, but at least in our everyday messaging now, the references have to change, right? When we speak about deviance, for example, the reference points have to now change.
Yeah.
We have to get out of this internal kind of intra-religious kind of sectarianism and the reference, because the average reference to deviance is to another Muslim group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas it needs to be to ideas that clash at the very root of Islam, ideas that are challenging the very existence of God.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Ideas that are challenging the very basis of some of the key kind of tenets of the Quran. Those are the things. Why? Because how many Deobandi kids are being affected by Brelvism and how many Brelvi kids are being affected by Deobandism? That's not what they're being affected by. Yeah. But every single one of them, without exception, is being introduced to evolution, is being introduced to kind of certain problematic liberal views, right? They're being introduced to kind of secular ideals. They're being introduced to generally this idea of liberty, which doesn't always contradict with Islam, but a kind of absolute kind of post-enlightenment idea of liberty, which shapes liberalism, that basically says, hey, everything goes.
Oh, yeah.
All, you know, everything's okay. You know, you're free to do whatever you want.
Which is very contrary to maybe this. It's just like the free speech argument as well. You know that you can say whatever you like, which isn't true.
There are massive philosophical and epistemological divergences that we have to identify and then figure out. Okay, how are we going to now address this to our community so that they can both live in this society,
I mean,
be firm.
We're coming to an end, soon. I mean, one of the things I just want to highlight that you mentioned that, you know, people need to be retrained and everything else. So, and you said you're giving your time to this. Have you put together a course or a package or something to
I've
look
already
into
started teaching a course that specifically addresses how to save our Iman how to protect our Iman in today's climate.
Right.
Which I'm teaching. And what I wanted to do basically was, well, it's kind of it's landing on me, isn't it? So when this madrasa contacted me, I thought, what do I do with them, with the teachers? So what I basically did was I just went through a section of the course that I was teaching. Right. And the idea is to basically continue to develop that.
Okay. So that's something then, inshallah,
people can access and look into.
And I think you're right. I think there are so many, it's like, you know, imams are expected to be counselors and everything else. And you need counseling training, you know. So there is a lot of training that is needed for people. And like you said, you know, the context that we're living in is
I just want to say before we go that nothing is more important than Iman.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, so, that's the whole point, isn't it?
And people don't realize it until their 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old child turns up and says, what are you talking about? I don't even believe in that stuff anymore.
Yeah. And it's sometimes because you can't answer it, or you can't answer it in a satisfactory way, dealing with the other ideas as well.
Research shows that one of the big factors in young people doubting Islam is because of not being given answers.
Wow. Right, that's a damning point. And
it's not because the answers don't exist. They go to people, they go to imams, they go to teachers, they don't get the answers, so they're like, maybe the answers don't exist.
Yeah.
And there is a psychological impact there.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Well, Jazakallah khair. This is actually a big topic and maybe we will discuss it again. Thank you for coming in. Sorry, guys, we've run out of time. Inshallah, join me next week for another episode of Face to Face. Take care.